With players both entering the portal as well as transfers visiting West Virginia, it's time for another transfer portal update here on the Country Roads webcast. Let's go! What's going on, Mountaineer Nation? Welcome back into the Country Roads webcast. As always, I'm your host, Jordan Cruz. And here, before we get into this video, I just want to give you guys a quick reminder. Do me a favor, hit that like button, give us a thumbs up on this video. It'll really help not only its performance, but future videos performances here on the channel as well. And if you're a West Virginia fan, Big 12 fan, college football fan, and you haven't already, be sure hit that subscribe button. Helps us, and it helps you, as it helps get more of this Mountaineer sports content out to Mountaineer Nation. Having said that, let's get into it. All right, so unfortunately, it's been a bit longer since I've had a chance to put out an update than I would have liked it to be. Work schedule combined with feeling a little bit under the weather, having a bit of a cold the past few days. My voice wasn't exactly ready to be on microphone. So because of that, kind of hold off on this a little bit. And since that time, there's been several West Virginia players enter the portal. And we've also had some more offers go out to transfer portal targets, and even had a few of those transfers on a visit. And some of those may be on commit watch now. I think we'll see some commitments come through this week for West Virginia. So let's kind of catch up on what's happened in the transfer portal for West Virginia over this past week. And hopefully moving forward, I'll be able to put these updates out more frequently. But let's catch up on who entered the portal for West Virginia. Then let's look at some targets and a couple of the players that visited that we may be looking for a commitment from in the near future. Starting off with the portal entries, obviously crediting a lot of these articles to WVSportsNow.com, and they're doing a great job covering the portal entries for West Virginia and the offers that are going out to some of these targets. So be sure to follow along there if you don't already. This one coming from Ethan Bach, and of course, Hershey McLaurin, West Virginia Spear safety, entering the transfer portal back on December 7th, one of two West Virginia defenders to enter on that date. And this is one of the more impactful ones that has come down the line, I think, just because of how much he's played for West Virginia. And he played well a lot throughout this season. However, I think at that spear position now, when you look at it, I think there's still some options on West Virginia's roster, but don't rule out some of these guys that West Virginia is targeting that we'll talk about here in a minute when we're looking at the future of that spear position now beyond Hershey McLaurin, Lance Dixon, and Marcus Floyd, with all of them moving on after this season. But following Hershey McLaurin, we also had Andrew Wilson Lamp announced his intentions to enter the transfer portal on the same day there on December 7th. I think this one was a little bit more expected, and to be honest, had a bit of a rough season. I would love to see Andrew Wilson Lamp have a bit of a resurgence wherever he lands, because he's a guy that came to West Virginia with a commitment of switching positions, was a pretty highly regarded recruit as a wide receiver, a fast guy, a lot of speed. They decided to switch him over to corner. It takes a few years for him to fully develop into the area where they thought that he could be a contributor on this team. Began the season as a starter at that position. After 1 week, that didn't work out. Ended up switching and bringing Malachi Ruffin in. He was the starter throughout the rest of the season. Andrew Wilson Lamp never really got back in the mix at the cornerback position. Was really involved on special teams, but I think unfortunately what he's going to be remembered for is those couple of special teams blunders he had in punt coverage for the Mountaineers that were costly at times this season. So I think all in all in this one is a win-win situation for both parties. I think, West Virginia's going to move on. They need someone else that can really contribute at that cornerback position and help them in the future, rather than just be a contributor on special teams, which is what Wilson Lamp was throughout the most of this season. And I think in Wilson Lamp's case, a fresh start could be great for him. He's a guy that's really athletic, ton of speed, and I think he does have potential. And maybe with a fresh start, he'll have a career resurgence as well. So West Virginia loses Andrew Wilson Lamp to the portal as well. And then moving on, you get another defender here in the portal, and this was probably the most impactful yet. And also one that has got me scratching my head as to why it keeps happening at this position. And that is the nose tackle position for the West Virginia Mountaineers, because Mike Lockhart announces his intentions to enter the transfer portal back on December 8th. And this means that for the third consecutive season, West Virginia has lost their starting nose tackle. You go back a couple seasons ago, Akeem Mesidor leaves that offseason. Last year, Jordan Jefferson replaces him, has a good year. He departs. And then now, yet again, for the third straight season, Mike Lockhart fills in as the starter there, has a good season, and he'll be entering the transfer portal for the second time. Coming to West Virginia a couple off seasons ago, I remember doing a video reporting on his commitment in the transfer portal to the Mountaineers coming over from Georgia Tech. back a couple off seasons ago. Now he'll enter the portal again, and West Virginia will look to a new starting nose tackle, not only next season, but let's look in the bowl game as well, as West Virginia will probably have Fatorma Mulba playing there in the bowl game as a starter, I would suspect, splitting time with Hammond Russell, and those guys will be around next season. The bright spot is when Mulba was in on the season, he was one of the highest graded defenders throughout the year, so I think he has a ton of potential there at that spot, and maybe Mike Lockhart saw some of that as well and thought he could get a better situation somewhere else and wouldn't have to worry about potentially splitting time with Mulba next year. So, this may be the most impactful loss as far as, a starter that played a ton this season. And like I said, it does make you scratch your head as to why we can't keep one of these starting nose tackles. Hopefully next year we're finally able to do it. But Mike Lockhart hits the portal. West Virginia will be without him for the bowl game, losing him on the defensive side. And the Mountaineers would lose one more defender here on the very next day on December 9th. And that would be freshman bandit James Hurd Jr., a guy that enrolled early. We heard a lot about as far as being one of the better pass rushers this staff had recruited, and we thought that he may be able to factor in as a freshman this season. Didn't turn out to be the case, battled some adversity, being injury related amongst some other things. And ultimately, I think, we talked about Mike Lockhart and Hershey McLaurin probably being the most impactful because they were the starters, but I think this one is an impact that hurts you down the line, I guess you could say, because he's a freshman at that bandit spot that I think was kind of tailor-made for that position more so than anyone West Virginia had really brought in yet. Has great pass rushing capabilities and I think has a bright future. So you hate to lose a young guy like James Hurd Jr. with those great pass rushing capabilities. We'll see where he lands. And let's not forget, I always got to throw this in when I talk about these transfer portal entries. Just because a player enters the transfer portal doesn't necessarily mean they cannot return to West Virginia. We've seen guys do that in the past, enter their name, but then decide to come back and play at West Virginia ultimately still yet. So that's always in the cards as well. Not saying that's the case here with James Hurd Jr. or anything, but just always want to throw that caveat in there. But not a big impact because he didn't play a role this season, but could have been an impactful player down the line with his pass rushing capabilities. James Hurd Jr. enters the transfer portal. And then lastly, and most recently for West Virginia, we saw just yesterday on December 10th, Justin Johnson announced his entry into the transfer portal. I think this one was a bit more expected with that crowded running back room and a couple of really good youngsters. Jaheim White, who has been confirmed to return to West Virginia, one of the more positive news things that I've heard throughout this offseason. You guys know I'm a huge fan of him. Still have C.J. Donaldson in the loop right now as well. So Justin Johnson decides to go and finish his career out elsewhere and can't really blame him for doing that. Love the way that he played the game. Very tough competitor throughout his West Virginia career and wish him well moving forward. So with that being said, let's take a look at our transfer portal tracker here on the CRW as we've added these guys to the transfer out list. And we've also updated the transfer target list with some new offers going out, some players committing elsewhere, and want to talk about some guys that have visited West Virginia here since our last update as well. And as we take a look at our transfer portal tracker here on the Country Roads webcast, you'll see the name of those 5 gentlemen that we just discussed there that have transferred out of West Virginia now, adding to the transfer out list. I talked a little bit about the spear position. Of course, Marcus Floyd will be around to fulfill that role in the bowl game for West Virginia, and I mentioned the guys moving forward down the line that could help there. When you look at James Hurd at the bandit spot, and West Virginia could have a potential hole there to fill at the bandit position, you do return Jared Bartlett, but you now lose both Tyron Bradley and James Hurd. It had exclusively pretty much been Bradley and Bartlett playing that position for West Virginia. So look for maybe one of these transfers West Virginia goes after to play that bandit spot. But something that I'm not ruling out as a possibility is the potential of a guy like Trey Lathan to slide over and play that bandit spot. He did great in pass rushing situations for West Virginia when he was involved last year. And if you look at the way things are shaking out, it looks like Ben Cutter will fill in as the Mike linebacker for the Mountaineers next season. Josiah Trotter is believed to be a will linebacker, and I believe he'll start there. Trey Lathan showed such great capabilities. You want to get him on the field. Maybe you put him at bandit, split time between him and Jared Bartlett there at that position for the future. I would not be surprised to see that happen. Just a little prediction on my own if we're talking about the future of the bandit spot. Then at nose tackle, I talked about Mulba and Hammond Russell for the future there. And then, of course, at running back, we know what we have there as far as replacements for these potential guys that are moving on here from the program. And we'll see what the program looks like without them a bit here in the bowl game. And then moving on to the targets, I have updated this list a little bit since the last week. Some guys that were on here have transferred to other places or have announced their commitments to other places, I guess I should say. So I've removed them from the list. But you see heavy influence on wide receiver and defensive backs still yet. West Virginia's also offered a few defensive linemen and linebackers. but there are a few guys that I want to highlight here that did visit this week for West Virginia. One of those being on the offensive line, Michael Marotta here from Valdosta State. I believe he's a potential center for the Mountaineers, multiple years left. The coaching staff has talked about kind of breaking these down into two categories: immediate guys and guys with multiple years of eligibility remaining. I love the multiple years of eligibility remaining because you can only transfer once without penalty. So if you get a guy with multiple years of eligibility, you're essentially kind of locking him in to your program. I've talked about that in the past here when talking about transfers. He visited the Mountaineers this past weekend, as did John Carlos Miller, a tight end from Elon. And I know you guys are probably looking at the school Elon and, thumbing your nose up a little bit at it, I guess you could say. But I'm telling you, my friend Mountaineer Paul really turned me on to the highlights of John Carlos Miller. Go check him out. You can find him on his X page. He's got a link to him there. It's a Google Drive document, and they are extremely impressive. This guy's, 6'5", 6'6", 250 pounds, and extremely fast and athletic, talking maybe 4.5 40 guy. So would love to see West Virginia be able to get him to commit. Imagine comparing him with Cole Taylor and Traylon Davis next season in that offense. West Virginia could be lethal there. He visited the Mountaineers, as well as a couple of defensive backs here that I want to highlight, both of which are at the top of this list: Aiden Garnes and Devin Cromwell. Aiden Garnes would be a cornerback, and Devin Cromwell is being recruited as a safety that could potentially play any one of the three safety positions, free, cat, or spear. We know West Virginia needs some help there at the spear, as we mentioned earlier. So those two guys had visits, and as you can see here, it seems like both of these guys really enjoyed their time there, as they have posted on X. You can follow at the Dev Cromwell there if you want to, Mountaineer fans. He says, great WVU football official visit. Big thanks to all the coaches and players involved with taking care of me and the family. Hashtag take me home. And you see some images he has shared there. And it is believed that he is not scheduling any other visits. It's pretty much down to West Virginia and Texas Tech in the case of Devin Cromwell. So the Mountaineers with a chance to land this safety coming from a Canadian school there, the University of Gulf. And West Virginia has done a good job with these international players. You look at Eddie V now starting on the West Virginia defensive line. Jaffa Veras, Ollie Straw, others within the program have done well as well. So glad to see West Virginia continuing that and pursuing a Canadian recruit here in Devin Cromwell. Kind of on commitment watch for him moving forward. We'll see where he lands. And then, of course, Aiden Garnes, a transfer cornerback. We know West Virginia needs to add corners. And here's one that's very talented and young with multiple years of eligibility remaining. So he falls right into that category I talked about earlier. And since his visit, he was actually crystal balled to West Virginia by 247 Sports. So maybe on commitment watch for Aiden Garnes as well. Would love to see him land in Morgantown. Would be a great addition for the future of West Virginia football in the secondary. If you want to follow him there, Mountaineer Nation, at Aiden Garnes 1 on X there. He says, what a time I had in Morgantown on my official visit. Thank you, WV, for having me and my family. Hail WV, trust the climb. And you see some pictures of him from his official visit there in Morgantown as well. A picture there with Coach Shadon Brown there, the Mountaineers cornerbacks coach. So couple of potential additions West Virginia is targeting. And as I mentioned, those want to pull up the transfer portal tracker one more time. Let you guys take a look at this transfer portal target list for West Virginia. You see a lot of defensive backs that have been offered by the Mountaineers that they are heavy after. And of course, some linebackers there, defensive linemen, offensive linemen, couple of tight ends, and a pretty decent slew of wide receivers as well that West Virginia is offering there. So I wanted to take a chance and update that here and continue to update this transfer portal tracker as we will throughout the offseason here on the Country Roads webcast. All right, so there you have it, Mountaineer Nation. Like I said, a week out from our last update, had a bit to cover here. Hopefully in the future, these videos will be more brief because I'll be able to bring them out to you guys more frequently throughout this transfer portal season, but we'll continue to update it here on the CRW, so be sure to subscribe to us here if you haven't already. And in addition to that, I want to encourage you guys, let me know, which of these transfer departures do you feel could be most harmful to West Virginia, or which of those transfer portal targets in that list that West Virginia has offered or made contact with are you most excited and hope to see West Virginia get a commitment from? Be sure, let us know your thoughts about any of the transfer portal activity going on there in the comments below. We really appreciate those interactions as we continue to try and grow the Country Roads webcast community throughout Mountaineer Nation. Having said that, as always, I'm Jordan Cruz, and until next time, let's go Mountaineers.